did you all learn to fight? Chances are you learned in your family. And maybe your family looked like this, where you were raising your voices and yelling, and your dog ran down the hall and hid under the bed. Or maybe your family fought more like this, where everybody smiled, said, "Oh, no, we're fine, no worries, everything's good." No matter how your family fought, maybe it was in between, maybe it was something very different from that. When we learn as children in our families, we learn by watching. Nobody sits us down and says, "Okay, here's the rule book. This is what you say first, second, third, and never say that. And this is how you win." It's unwritten rules. And some of those unwritten rules are really effective and helpful, and when we carry them with us to school or work or with our friends or maybe even the bus, they work really well. But there's one of those rules, just one of those rules that I want us to change. And that's the rule of silence when someone says something offensive, when someone makes a racially insensitive remark, or when someone uses a slur. And that rule is especially prevalent in white families. So I'm asking us all to speak out, but I'm especially interested in more white folks speaking up. Because I believe if we want to reach a tipping point and create racial justice in our lifetime, we need to speak. We need to interrupt the cycle of silence. I have a role model who showed me what this might look like. Julian Hampton Morgan was a wealthy white woman who lived in Montgomery, Alabama before the bus boycott, when the buses weren't yet integrated. She's not my role model because she was wealthy. She's my role model because of something she did, the way she changed the rules. Because she was a wealthy white woman, she did not have to ride the bus, but she didn't like driving, so she rode the bus. And because she was on the bus, she saw things that other women from her class and race didn't see. One day she was on a bus and she's up in the front with all the other white passengers, just like she was supposed to be. And the bus pulled over and picked up a passenger. An African-American woman got on, she paid her fare, and then she got off the bus because she was supposed to get in the back door to sit in the back of the bus. But on that morning, when that bus driver let her out of the bus after she'd paid her fare, that bus driver, he took off and he left her on the curb. He took off and left her there. And Juliet Hampton Morgan was sitting in the front of the bus and she saw this and she felt so angry. So she did something she had never done before. She stood up and she reached out and she pulled the emergency cord on the bus and she said, "Stop! That's not right!" She was so angry. And she changed the dynamic for everyone on that bus. Most of the people on that bus, black or white, had never seen or heard a white woman speak out against racial injustice. So she changed the rules for them, and she changed the experience of that bus driver because she broke the rules. She said something. And when I talk to friends, especially white friends, about this, a lot of times what they say is, "Well, I don't want to make anybody uncomfortable." And I completely understand that. Every time I speak out, every time my friends who speak out, it is uncomfortable. But aren't we already uncomfortable? When you read the headlines, you think about the last time you heard someone make a disrespectful remark. I mean, doesn't that make us uncomfortable? We are uncomfortable already. I want to tell you about how my dad showed me that you need to speak up even when you're uncomfortable. So this is my family, my sister and me, my grandmother and I, and then my family, my sister, me, my grandmother, my dad, and my mom. And one summer we were vacationing. I was probably about 10 years old, and we're staying in a cabin. It's got one big room downstairs. And my sister and I are playing in one side of the room, and my dad and my mom and his mom, my grandmother, are talking at the table. And you know how kids listen in, right, when the adults are talking? So my sister and I are listening in to hear what the grown-ups are going to say. And they're talking about something in the news. And the article's talking about an impact something's going to have on the African American community. And then my grandmother said something that made me really uncomfortable. She said, "Those people." Those people. You know that phrase. She sounded like she was sneering. I could tell she did not respect the people she was talking about. And I felt myself hold my breath, and my spine stiffened, and I was waiting to see what was going to happen next. I felt so uncomfortable. She was my grandmother. I loved her. And then my dad did something that changed the rules in our family. My dad said, "Mom, I love you, but you can't talk that way in my house." And when he did that, my grandmother got up, and she walked over to her room, she opened the door, she closed it, and she went inside. But then my dad did something that changed me, because he got up and he followed her, and he knocked on the door, and they went in and they talked. They had a conversation. And when they came out of that room, we were still a family. She didn't leave, she stayed with us. We still loved her, she still loved us. She still bragged about my dad and my sister and I, my mom, when she was on the plane, to anybody who would listen. She still came, visited at Halloween, and then stole my Halloween candy. She still had a laugh that I just remember her laugh. And my dad and her became closer over the years. We were still a family. There was still love, but there was more respect. And there was more understanding. And most importantly, I had been shown that it's important to speak up, even when it's uncomfortable. And when I talk to my friends, especially my white friends, about what to say, a lot of times what I'll hear is, "I don't know what to say. I don't know how to start that conversation." And I totally get that too. Because just like when we learn how to fight in our families, we don't get a rule book. There's no script that works in every single one of these conversations. There's no phrase that will always get the result you want. And so I find what works for me is if I start from a place of trying to understand the other person, where they're coming from, why they came to that conclusion or felt like it was okay to say what they said, but I also want them to understand me, why it offended me, why it might offend my family or my friends. I might ask them to tell me more, try to stay in the conversation longer. And that usually means I need to take a really deep breath, maybe 3, maybe 10, and I have to count 1, 2. I might have to count to 10 too before I say something that will not move the conversation forward. Because if I start off by calling them a name, which I honestly sometimes want to do, if I start there, I only make the divide wider. If I get righteous, doesn't help anybody, except I get to feel better about myself because I'm somehow better than them. That doesn't help. And we know the stakes are really high right now. 16 months ago, just 3 blocks away from here, a young white man walked into an historic African American church, and he killed 9 people. He did this, he said, to start a race war. That was what he said. And after he did this, a lot of people said, "I don't understand how this could happen. How did this happen?" And to try to understand something that's incomprehensible to many people, reporters went out and interviewed his friends and his family to try to understand, who was this young man? Who was this shooter? Why did he do this? And one reporter interviewed one of his friends, and that friend said, "Well, you know, he always made racially insensitive remarks, but I just assumed it was a joke, so I never said anything." And then he said, "Maybe I should have said something." If we want to change this headline, "The unspeakable happened in our city," we need to speak. We need to speak even though we're uncomfortable. We need to speak to people we love, people we respect, even if we are not feeling very comfortable. We need to speak. So I invite you, especially all the white folks who are hearing me now, I invite you to speak out, interrupt, break the silence, start that conversation and keep that conversation going. And if we do that, we can reach racial justice in our lifetime. And it's most important we speak because you never know who's listening. Thank you.